He was at the airport, tickets in hand, ready for a simple flight. Then a cop appeared, pointing, ordering, accusing, handcuffs clicking around his wrists before he could even react. Travelers stared, whispers spreading like wildfire while he stood frozen, bewildered. No warning, no reason, just suspicion based on the color of his skin. But what happened next would shatter assumptions and expose a truth that the officer never expected. How could one moment of prejudice unravel everything? It started like any other trip. Marcus, a hard-working father in his 30s, arrived at the airport hours early, suitcase rolling behind him. He had carefully packed the night before, shirts folded neatly, his son's drawing tucked into a side pocket for comfort, and a small gift for his wife waiting at home. Travel wasn't new to him. Over the years, he'd flown dozens of times for work trips and family reunions. Airports to Marcus were symbols of connection, bridges between people he loved and places he belonged. He blended into the crowd of tired travelers and excited tourists, moving with quiet confidence. He found comfort in the rhythm of airports, the beeping of scanners, the murmur of conversations, the shuffle of rolling suitcases across polished floors. There was nothing unusual about this day, but in that same terminal, unseen eyes were already locked on him. A routine flight was about to turn into a nightmare. Marcus had no idea that within minutes, his sense of safety would be shattered, and he would be treated not as a father, not as a professional, not as a man, but as a suspect. Marcus wheeled his bag through the crowded terminal, scanning the departure screens, his mind already on the flight ahead. He didn't notice the officer at first, the uniformed man who had fixed his gaze on Marcus with chilling intent. The officer's stare was unblinking, calculating, like a predator preparing to strike. Within seconds, the sound of heavy boots approached from behind, louder, closer. Then a sharp voice cut through the steady hum of airport chatter. It carried an authority that demanded attention. Travelers turned their heads, conversations halted, and all eyes locked onto Marcus. Before Marcus could even process what was happening, cold metal bit into his wrists. Handcuffs snapped shut with brutal finality, the sharp clink echoing in the vast terminal. His suitcase tipped sideways, spilling shirts and papers across the floor. His heart stuttered as the officer grabbed his arm with unnecessary force, jerking him backward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people froze in shock while others instinctively reached for their phones. Screens lit up like fireflies, raised high above heads to record. Marcus's humiliation was no longer private. It was on display, broadcast to strangers, and soon the world. The officer barked accusations, his voice booming across the terminal. He claimed Marcus matched the description of a dangerous suspect. Armed robbery, fleeing the scene, potential threat. The words hit like punches. Marcus's mind spun. He had never been in trouble with the law, not once. And now, in seconds, he was branded a criminal. Whispers spread like wildfire. "What did he do?" one voice murmured. "Must be serious if they're cuffing him," another added. Assumptions filled the silence where facts were missing. And through it all, Marcus stood stunned, his chest tightening with shame, confusion, and fury. The officer tightened his grip, hauling Marcus forward with rough hands. His shoulder ached under the force, his dignity stripped away with every step. The eyes of dozens followed him, some with pity, others with judgment. None with action. Then came the ultimate humiliation. Over the airport intercom, Marcus's name was called for boarding. His gate was just steps away, his seat waiting. He should have been walking toward his destination, toward home, toward family. Instead, he was being dragged in the opposite direction, each step further from freedom. The officer announced loudly that Marcus was detained. The word rang out like a sentence, echoing against sterile walls. To the crowd, it sounded final, a confirmation of guilt. In that moment, Marcus wasn't a traveler. He wasn't a father. He was a threat, shackled in chains. Still, Marcus swallowed his anger. He knew that rage would only fuel the stereotype the officer seemed eager to prove. His silence was not weakness, it was survival. But inside, the weight of injustice pressed heavier than the cuffs themselves. He thought about his family waiting at the other end of this flight. He thought about missing his son's laughter, his wife's embrace. He thought about the hours, maybe days, he could lose if this officer's accusations stuck. And worst of all, he thought about the silence around him. Dozens of witnesses, dozens of phones recording, yet not a single voice speaking up in real time. It was easier for them to watch, to assume, to avoid stepping into danger. But beneath the chaos, something else was happening. Those phones recording, the same silence that felt like betrayal, were quietly becoming his shield. Evidence was building. Proof was forming. Proof that would soon unravel everything the officer claimed to be true. Marcus didn't know it yet. All he knew was the shame of being dragged through an airport like a criminal. All he knew was the sinking dread of being powerless in a place meant for freedom. And as the officer shoved him into a back hallway toward interrogation rooms, one question burned in his mind. Would anyone believe him? The interrogation room was a world away from the bustling terminal. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on cold white walls. Marcus sat chained to a metal chair, his wrists raw and aching. His passport and boarding pass lay tossed on the table like discarded evidence. The officer paced the room, his steps heavy, his voice sharp. He repeated the accusations like a script he didn't need to prove: armed robbery, fleeing the scene, dangerous suspect. Each word carried finality, as if guilt had already been decided. Marcus's heart pounded. None of this made sense. Minutes earlier, he had been a man catching a flight. Now, he was a criminal in the eyes of authority. The officer leaned in close, his breath hot, his tone dripping with certainty. He didn't ask questions. He declared conclusions. Marcus wasn't a person to him. He was a profile, a statistic, a stereotype. Then came the breaking point. The officer announced he would alert the airline, ensuring Marcus was permanently flagged. It wasn't just this flight on the line. It was Marcus's freedom to travel ever again. In one man's hands lay the power to ruin his life. Marcus felt the walls close in. His chest tightened. He thought of his son's drawing, folded carefully in his suitcase, and wondered if he'd ever make it home to see him again. But before despair could take hold, the door burst open. Another officer rushed in, holding a phone. His expression was urgent, troubled. The recordings from passengers were spreading fast. Airport officials had already reviewed surveillance footage. The truth was out. The real suspect had been caught minutes earlier, in another terminal, wearing different clothes, standing taller, with an entirely different face. The resemblance? None. The pacing officer froze. His voice faltered, his authority slipping like sand through fingers. The room shifted. Power, once in his hands, evaporated. Marcus, still chained to the chair, raised his head. His calm eyes met the officer's silence. The evidence was undeniable. The world was about to see who was really guilty. Marcus was released at last. The cuffs came off, but the red marks on his wrists stung as a reminder. The officer fumbled through excuses, avoiding eye contact. But the damage had already been done. Marcus stepped back into the terminal, not as a free man, but as someone who had been publicly humiliated, stripped of dignity in front of hundreds. His flight was gone. His seat was empty. His reputation carried whispers he couldn't control. Yet the truth stood clear. He had never been the criminal. The real crime was the prejudice that put him in chains. The videos spread quickly across social media, sparking outrage. Millions saw the injustice with their own eyes. No one could dismiss it as a misunderstanding. For Marcus, it was vindication, but also a wound that wouldn't heal easily, because this wasn't just about one man at an airport. It was about every black man who has been stopped, searched, or suspected simply for existing. It was about every moment where silence in the crowd allowed injustice to flourish, and that is the deeper truth. Marcus's story may have ended with exposure, but the pattern continues every single day. Airports, streets, schools, workplaces, places meant for safety and opportunity can become arenas of humiliation when bias takes control. Marcus went home, reunited with his family. But he carried something heavier than a suitcase. He carried the memory of chains, the sting of silence, the reality of how quickly life can turn when prejudice is in uniform. So the question remains, how many more people must endure what Marcus endured before real change takes root? How many more lives must be interrupted, humiliated, or destroyed before the truth is finally enough to reshape not just one officer's actions, but an entire system?